The words cut deeper than any knife ever could. "You're like a stranger in this house." I stood there in my own living room, the room where I'd rocked each of my children to sleep, where I'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I'd built a lifetime of memories. And my own son looked at me like I was an intruder. At 74 years old, I had survived the death of my husband, raised 4 children on my own, and weathered every storm life threw at me. But nothing prepared me for becoming a stranger in the home I had spent 40 years creating with my own hands and heart. The morning sun streamed through windows I had cleaned countless times, casting familiar patterns on hardwood floors I had walked for decades. But everything else felt different. The couch where I used to read bedtime stories had been replaced with something modern and uncomfortable. The family photos that once lined the mantelpiece were gone, replaced by abstract art I didn't understand. Even the smell was wrong. No longer the warm scent of my cooking, but something sterile and cold, like a hotel room. I had moved in with my eldest son David and his family 6 months earlier, after a fall that left me with a broken hip and the frightening realization that living alone was no longer safe. "Come stay with us, Mom," he'd said. "It's your house too now." But as I walked through these transformed spaces, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. The whispers started almost immediately. Not the cruel, intentional kind, but the thoughtless murmurs of people who forgot that age doesn't make you deaf. I heard my daughter-in-law telling her friend on the phone, "She doesn't really fit in here anymore. Everything has to revolve around what she needs." I heard my teenage granddaughter complaining to her boyfriend, "It's like having a babysitter, but she's the one who needs watching." Each whisper was a paper cut to my heart, small, but deep enough to draw blood. At dinner, I would try to contribute to conversations about current events, drawing on 7 decades of watching the world change. But my observations were met with polite smiles and quick subject changes, as if my perspective was outdated, irrelevant. When I suggested family traditions we used to cherish, like Sunday dinners where everyone actually talked to each other instead of staring at phones, my ideas were dismissed with patronizing patience. "That's nice, Mom. But times are different now. Times are different now." Those 5 words became the wall between my past and their present, between the woman I had always been and the burden they saw me as. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was sitting in what used to be my favorite armchair, now relegated to a corner because it didn't match the new decor, when David's wife Lisa announced they were thinking of renovating the kitchen. My kitchen, the heart of our home for 40 years. "What do you think, Mom?" David asked, but his tone suggested he was asking out of obligation, not genuine interest. I looked at that kitchen, the scene of birthday cake baking, holiday meal preparation, late-night conversations with children who couldn't sleep. Every scratch on the counter told a story. Every cabinet held memories of family dinners and celebrations. "I think," I said carefully, "that kitchen has served us well. It's where you all learned to cook, where we shared so many meals together. Maybe we could just update it instead of tearing it all down." David and Lisa exchanged one of those looks, the kind couples share when they're trying to decide who has to deliver bad news to a child. "Mom," David said with forced gentleness, "you have to understand, this isn't really about the past anymore. We need to think about what works for our family now. Our family now, not our family. Our family now," as if I had been edited out of the current version. "I understand wanting to make changes," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I just thought, since this is my home too." That's when my daughter Sarah, who had stopped by for dinner, let out a frustrated sigh. "Mom, you have to stop acting like this is still your house. You're living here now, but it's not the same thing." The room fell silent. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one my late husband had given me for our 20th anniversary, seemed to stop ticking. David looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, that's not what we meant." But Sarah wasn't done. The stress of caring for children, working full-time and worrying about me, had apparently reached its breaking point. "No, we need to be honest here. Mom, I love you, but you're like a stranger in this house. You don't understand how we live now, what we need. You can't expect everything to stay exactly the way it was 40 years ago. You're like a stranger in this house." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my chest tighten with a pain sharper than any heartbreak I'd ever experienced. Because it wasn't just the cruelty of the statement, it was the truth underneath it. I was a stranger. In the house I had made a home. In the family I had sacrificed everything to raise. In the life I had built brick by brick, memory by memory, year by year. I forced my lips into what I hoped looked like a smile. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't realize. I'll try to remember that." But inside something shattered. Not dramatically, like glass hitting concrete, but slowly, like ice melting away to nothing. Later that night, alone in the small guest room that had become my world, I sat on the edge of the single bed and let the memories wash over me like a tide I couldn't hold back. I remembered David at 5 years old, racing through these same hallways in his superhero cape, begging me to chase him. "You can't catch me, Mommy." He'd shriek with delight, and I'd pretend to lumber after him, making monster noises that sent him into fits of giggles. I could still see Sarah at 12, crying at this very kitchen table because a boy at school had been mean to her. I'd held her close and whispered, "You are beautiful and strong and worthy of love, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different." She'd looked up at me with such trust, such absolute faith that Mom could fix anything. There was Michael's first day of high school, standing nervous in the entryway, and me straightening his tie while assuring him he was going to do great things. Rebecca practicing piano in the living room, the same living room that now felt foreign and cold, while I made dinner and hummed along to her favorite songs. Every corner of this house carried pieces of my soul. The door frame where I'd measured their heights year after year. The window where I'd watched for them to come home from dates and parties, worried sick until I saw their headlights in the driveway. The bathroom where I'd bandaged scraped knees and wiped away tears. How could they not see it? How could the very walls that witnessed my love, my sacrifices, my endless devotion suddenly feel foreign to my presence? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos. Images of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, graduations and weddings, all of us together and happy. In every picture, I was the center, the nucleus around which our family orbited. When had I become a satellite drifting at the edges of their universe? The guest room felt smaller each night. It was clean and comfortable enough, but it wasn't mine in any way that mattered. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo I'd brought from my old bedroom. One of my late husband and me on our wedding day. Young and hopeful and certain that love could conquer anything. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered to his smiling face. "How do I find my place in a family that's grown around the empty space I used to fill?" But Harold couldn't answer, and I was left with only the sound of my own breathing in the darkness. The days began blending together in a pattern of polite invisibility. I would wake early, make coffee quietly so as not to disturb anyone, and sit by the window watching the New York streets come alive. Business people hurrying to catch trains, mothers walking children to school, delivery trucks rumbling past, all of them belonging somewhere, moving with purpose toward places where they were expected. I tried to make myself useful. I would fold laundry, tidy up, start dinner preparations, but even my helpfulness seemed to irritate them. Lisa would find me in the kitchen and gently but firmly take over. "Oh, you don't have to do that, Mom. Why don't you go relax? Relax." As if purposelessness was a gift instead of a slow death. David would come home from work tired and stressed, barely acknowledging me beyond a polite, "How was your day, Mom?" before disappearing into his home office. Sarah visited less frequently, And when she did, she spoke to me with the careful patience people reserve for difficult children or confused elderly people. I began to understand why some widows waste away after their spouses die. It's not just the loss of the person you love. It's the loss of the person you were when you were loved, needed, essential to someone's happiness. Instead of anger, I chose something harder: patience. Anger would have been easier, would have given me energy and purpose. But patience required faith that love, real love, finds its way back home eventually. In the quiet hours before dawn, I would sit in the corner chair that didn't match their modern furniture and pray, not for my situation to change, but for something deeper. God, may my children never feel like strangers in their own homes. May they always know where they belong. May they understand that love doesn't expire just because bodies age and needs change. And if you're still with me in this story, if these words are resonating in your heart, it's probably because you've seen this pain before, either in your own life or in the eyes of someone you love. Stay with me, because the heart of this story is still coming. It was my 6-year-old granddaughter, Emma, who finally spoke the truth everyone else was dancing around. She was the only one who still seemed genuinely happy to see me, still climbed into my lap for stories, still asked me to teach her the card games I'd taught her father decades earlier. One afternoon, while the adults were busy with work calls and household management, Emma found me in my usual corner reading a library book. "Grandma," she said, settling beside my chair with the matter-of-fact curiosity only children possess. "Why don't they listen to you anymore?" The question stopped my heart. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "At dinner, when you talk about old times or suggest things, they get that look." "What look?" "The same look Mommy gets when I ask her the same question over and over. Like they're tired of hearing it, out of the mouths of babes. Children see what adults work so hard to hide, even from themselves." I set down my book and looked at this beautiful child who carried my late husband's eyes and my own stubborn chin. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes the people who love you most can make you feel the most invisible? "Sometimes, Emma," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Love is quiet. It doesn't always sound like listening or look like paying attention, but it never leaves. Even when they act like strangers?" Even when they act like strangers. She had heard more than I'd realized. "Even then," I whispered, pulling her close. "Love finds a way." She hugged me tight, her small arms fierce with the conviction that only the very young possess. "I always listen to you, Grandma. You're not a stranger to me." And in that moment, in the arms of this precious child, I felt less invisible, still unwanted, still displaced, but not entirely erased. That night, I did something I hadn't done since moving in. I wrote a letter, not to my children. That would feel like manipulation, like emotional blackmail. Instead, I wrote to the house itself, to the walls that held 40 years of my love, to the home I created with my hands and heart. I know they think I don't belong here anymore. I see how they look at me. Not with cruelty, but with the kind of weary patience reserved for house guests who've overstayed their welcome. "But you know better, don't you? You remember the young mother who painted your walls, who chose your furniture, who filled your rooms with laughter and arguments and the beautiful chaos of a growing family. This house carries my soul in every room. The kitchen where I taught my children to cook and to love. The living room where we celebrated every milestone. The bedrooms where I sang lullabies and chased away nightmares. Even if they can't see it anymore, even if I'm just a stranger visiting memories of herself, my love will always be in these walls, when I'm gone. And I will be gone someday, sooner rather than later. I hope they'll find this letter. I hope they'll remember that home isn't about furniture or decorating or keeping up with modern times. Home is about the love that gets baked into the foundation, year after year, through ordinary moments that become extraordinary, only in memory. Take care of them for me. keep them warm and safe and remind them, in whatever way houses remember, that they were deeply loved. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the drawer of my bedside table, underneath the Bible Harold had given me on our first anniversary. Some words are meant to be found later, when grief has softened hearts enough to truly hear them. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it a crisis that would change everything. David's youngest daughter, my granddaughter Lily, had been struggling in school. Not academically. She was brilliant, just like her father had been. But socially, the pressure of high school, the cruelty of teenage social hierarchies, and the constant competition had taken a toll on her mental health that no one had noticed until it was almost too late. The call came at midnight on a Tuesday in December. Lily had been found by a friend, sitting on the roof of their school building, contemplating whether the pain of living was worth enduring. She was safe, but barely, and the family was thrown into a crisis that stripped away all pretense and social niceties. At the hospital, while David paced and Lisa cried, and Sarah made frantic phone calls to therapists and counselors, I sat quietly in the corner of the waiting room, just an old woman in the background, irrelevant to the real drama unfolding. But when Lily was finally stable and asking for family, something unexpected happened. The first name she whispered was mine. "Where's Grandma? I want to talk to Grandma." David looked surprised. "Mom, Lily's asking for you." I walked into that sterile hospital room where my beautiful 16-year-old granddaughter lay connected to monitors, her face pale but her eyes alert. When she saw me, tears started flowing. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I scared everyone." I took her hand in mine, hands that were wrinkled and spotted with age, but still strong enough to hold the people I loved. "Sweet girl, you have nothing to apologize for. You're here. You're alive. That's all that matters. I felt so alone. Like nobody understood how hard everything is. Like I didn't belong anywhere. Like I didn't belong anywhere." The words echoed in my chest, and I realized this beautiful child had been carrying the same pain I'd been nursing, the same sense of displacement and invisibility. "Oh, darling," I whispered, stroking her hair. "I know exactly how that feels." And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I talked, really talked. Not the careful, polite small talk I'd been reduced to, but the deep, honest sharing that had once been my gift to my family. I told Lily about my own struggles with feeling invisible, about the difficulty of finding your place in a world that seems to have moved on without you. I shared stories of my teenage years during a different era, when the pressures were different, but the feelings of not quite fitting in were exactly the same. "The secret," I said, "is understanding that belonging isn't about being perfect or meeting everyone else's expectations. It's about being loved for who you are, flaws and all. And you, my precious girl, are so deeply loved." We talked for hours, not just me comforting her, but both of us sharing the burden of feeling like strangers in places where we should feel most at home. By morning, Lily was sitting up, eating hospital pancakes, and smiling for the first time in weeks. David and Lisa stood in the doorway, watching their daughter laugh at one of my ridiculous stories about getting my head stuck in a fence as a child. I saw something shift in their expressions. Not just gratitude, but recognition. "I don't know what you said to her," David whispered later, "but she's more herself than she's been in months." For the first time since moving in with them, I felt necessary. Not just useful, not just helpful, but necessary, essential. The way I used to feel when they were small, and I was the person who could fix anything with a kiss and a bedtime story. Over the following weeks, as Lily recovered and the family began the hard work of addressing the underlying issues that had led to her crisis, something beautiful began to happen. They started asking for my perspective again, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect for the wisdom I'd earned through 7 decades of living and loving and surviving. David asked my advice about how to balance work pressure with being present for his family. Sarah wanted to know how I'd managed to raise 4 children without losing my sense of self. Lisa began including me in decisions about family meals and holiday traditions. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever had to fight to find your place in spaces where you once belonged naturally? The transformation wasn't sudden or dramatic. Real change rarely is. It was gradual, like sunrise slowly illuminating a landscape you thought had been lost to darkness. My corner chair was moved back to a place of prominence. My input was sought and valued. My presence was welcomed rather than merely tolerated. One evening in early spring, as we sat around the dinner table, the same table where I'd been dismissed and silenced, Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I owe you an apology. When I called you a stranger in this house, that was cruel and wrong. You're not a stranger. You're the reason this house became a home in the first place." David nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. We got so caught up in our own lives, our own stress, that we forgot to see you as a person instead of just a situation to manage. "You built this family," Lisa added. "Every tradition we cherish, every value we hold dear, every way we know how to love each other. It all came from you. We're sorry it took a crisis to remind us." I looked around that table at the faces I'd loved since the moment I first held each of my children, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I felt like I belonged. "I never stopped loving you," I said, my voice steady with the quiet strength that comes from surviving your own heartbreak. Even when I felt like a stranger, even when I questioned my place here, I never stopped believing that love finds its way back home. Emma, now 7 and wiser than her years, piped up from her booster seat. "Grandma, you were never a stranger. You just got lost for a while. But we found you again. You just got lost for a while. But we found you again." Sometimes children understand profound truths that adults complicate with pride and stubborn independence and the exhausting work of daily survival. Later that night, I retrieved the letter from my bedside drawer, the one I'd written to the house, to the walls that held my memories. I read it again, smiling at the sadness that had prompted its writing, then gently tore it into pieces. Some words are meant to be written in moments of despair so that healing can find room to grow. The house felt different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because love had been allowed back in. My love, yes, but also their love for me. Love that had never actually disappeared, just gotten buried under stress and change and the assumption that I would always be there, always be patient, always be willing to shrink myself to fit into whatever space they had available. I kept my promise to myself and to God. I had chosen patience over anger, love over resentment, and that choice had made space for healing that might never have been possible if I'd let bitterness take root in my heart. They called me a stranger in my own house, but I chose to respond with love. I stayed when leaving would have been easier. I forgave when harboring hurt would have been more satisfying. I waited for them to remember that home isn't about ownership or authority or who gets to make decisions about kitchen renovations. Home is about the people who shaped you, who loved you first, who sacrificed their own dreams to make yours possible. Home is about honoring the hands that built not just the physical structure, but the emotional foundation that makes a house worth living in. As I settled into sleep that night in my corner bedroom, which no longer felt like exile, but like a peaceful retreat, I reflected on the journey that had brought us full circle. They had called me a stranger, and for a while I had felt like one. But love, patient and persistent and stronger than pride, had shown us the way back to each other. Never let the hands that built your home feel unwelcome within it. Never let age or change or the pressures of modern life convince you that the people who loved you first have become irrelevant to your story. And if you find yourself treating someone as a stranger when they should be treated as treasure, remember this: it's never too late to come home to love. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, there's an elderly parent feeling invisible in their own family, or an adult child who's forgotten that their foundation was built by someone who's still standing right beside them, waiting patiently to be seen again.